What up, Truth Fam? Last night's show was fire as we unpacked the epic Diddy trial with powerhouse, brilliant guests like Judge Lauren Lake, civil rights attorney GERALD GRIGGS, pop culture expert Armon Wiggins, and journalist Dara Kennedy. From the legal twists to the shocking testimonies, we're all in on this three-part Truth Talk special on Diddy, the rise and fall of a bad boy.
Are y'all ready to roll? Let's go.
Tonight, in part two of our special about the Diddy trial, we get even deeper with our resident medical correspondent, Dr. Frita, who will walk us through Diddy's health problems and the mysteries surrounding Al B. Shore's health crisis and the untimely death of Kim Porter. It's Truth Talks. It's the truth that they don't want you to hear. So, of course, Dr. Cheyenne Bryant is here. Welcome.
What's going on, Torre? What's up, Truth Avengers? It's your favorite doc, Dr. Bryant. I'm excited to cover a case that has really taken the whole culture by surprise. And I think for other people has really disappointed a lot of folks too. So excited to hear our experts really get into the guts and glory of what that looks like and what that is. So let's rock and roll, Truth Tellers. Let's do it.
Last night, we had an amazing conversation about life inside the courtroom, what was going on outside the courtroom, the circus out there where people are pouring baby oil on each other. We talked about the family aspect. I want to get into the legal side and chop that up with two people who we love, who've been on this show a lot. Judge Lauren Lake, we know and love her. Civil rights attorney GERALD GRIGGS is back once again. We love and respect him. I think one core question here, is this a victory or not? And I think that most people who are closely watching this trial knew that racketeering was not going to happen. And they knew that prostitution for transportation would happen. That would be found guilty. Racketeering, most people thought that will never be found guilty, right? The sex trafficking cases were closer. Sex trafficking with respect to Jane, we were like, that's never going to happen. That's ridiculous. Sex trafficking with respect to Cassie was the whole ballgame. That carries a 15-year penalty. Mark Agnifilo, Diddy's lead attorney, and the rest of his $20 million legal team was great at framing this as almost a First Amendment case to where it was like, you can't penalize someone for what they do in their bedroom when it's private with consenting adults. And so when you get out of a 15-year charge, Lauren, I think that's a victory. Even if you get a couple of years, 2-3 years in prison, I could have gotten 15 years in prison. This to me, for Diddy is a victory.
I agree. And I will say this, it is a victory. It is not the ultimate victory, right? That would, of course, been a not guilty on all the charges, or at least being able to go home at this point. But it is a victory. What he was looking at was far worse than what he ended up being convicted of. And I think from a defense perspective, as I've stated before, I am a former criminal defense attorney. While it is not the ultimate victory, it is a victory. And that's why you saw the defense team pretty much owning that outside of the courtroom and saying, listen, we consider this to be a huge victory. Now, as a defendant turning around and walking right back to lock up, that doesn't feel too good. And not knowing when you're going to be able to go home again. Sure, there are still things left to be decided, but I do see this, when we use phrases like that, the prosecution got out lawyered, that is a victory. When we say they got dusted, they got wiped up by the defense, it leans itself to it being a level of victory. But I just have to say this, because when we start talking about legal proceedings like this, I want to remind people that when we are dealing with situations where there are victims, whether there's a not guilty verdict or not, what people have to understand is there are still very real issues involved here. Domestic violence, as we have talked about, most certainly, and a lot of other things where we're speaking about in the context of trying a case, but there is a lot of loss here. So when we start throwing around victory, there is a lot of loss here. And I want to make sure that I'm honoring the fact that, you know, the way Cassie was treated, Jane, and many of the other people who testified, while it didn't rise to the level of the jury convicting, I want to honor the fact that there has been real pain and hurt here.
I want to bring in Dr. Bryan, but Gerald, question to you. Is this not a victory? The man could have been looking at a 15-some year longer prison sentence. He escapes that. I mean, after the verdicts were read, Diddy is on his knees praying and celebrating. He and his children are clapping. The lawyers are hugging. They were jubilant. Are you here to tell them they're all wrong? It wasn't a victory?
I'm here to tell them what the jury said, and it's not a victory. It's a guilty. Anytime you hear guilty in a courtroom, especially a criminal proceeding, that's not a victory. So just because he won't face 15 to life, he still faces 20 years if they stack them. So, you know, I'm not arguing, you know, my opinion. I'm arguing what the jury actually found. They found him guilty of 2 violations of the Mann Act. And so he faces a sentencing in October where he will find out his fate. And I do believe he's probably going to get prison time. I think the judge has signaled that by not releasing him on bond. So again, as a criminal defense attorney, somebody who's been doing this for 21 years, a former public defender, anytime you walk out of a courtroom without your client, that's not a victory. And to push back on this, it's not the trial of the century, because for it to be the trial of the century, you have to get a full acquittal.
He's going to remain in custody until his sentencing. They are trying to expedite the sentencing. So it might happen in October. The current date is October, but it might be moved up. And he's going to get credit for the 10 months in prison that he's already served. The government is asking for 5 years or less. The defense is asking for about 2 years. So we're looking at maybe 3 to 4 years in prison, maybe less. You know, Cassie and other victims have written letters saying that he should remain in prison because he's a true danger to them, despite the verdict. His legal team argued that it's pimps who've been convicted of the Mann Act. People who made millions off of prostitution, they were released. Well, he was just a user of prostitution. But this judge said no bail because Diddy has been a violent person. And he used Mark Agnifalo's argument against him. But the Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, Gerald, this was created to keep Jack Johnson, champion boxer, from traveling around the South with white women. And it feels kind of racially icky and strange to see a black man again convicted of the Mann Act. How do you feel about that, given the Mann Act's racist background?
Given the background of the statute that was created by James Robert Mann for that particular purpose, to prevent a black heavyweight champion from traveling around the country with women who consented to them traveling around the country with him, it does seem to be a disservice to African-American men. But we have to, again, listen to the words of the judge when he used the lead criminal defense attorney's words against him in denying the bond. You admitted that
right.
Your client did domestic violence, serious domestic violence. So he is a threat to the community, and that's why he denied bond. And I think the mistake that the government made was bringing this case in federal court. It could have been brought in state court, and I think the outcome would have been a lot different from the victims who were brutalized in this case. We saw it on the video of Cassie Ventura being dragged through that hotel room and being beaten. And I think the defense attorneys kind of said that, you know, my client, you know, is an abuser, a domestic violence abuser, but he's not on trial for that in these particular charges. So I think that the judge has already used their words against him, and I think he's going to continue to do that. And so, you know, even though it was a Mann Act violation and conviction, I think the violence is going to be what necessitates prison time.
Yeah, Lauren, what do you think about this Mann Act conviction in a world where the Mann Act is inherently racist, or its origins are inherently racist? And generally, this is used post Jack Johnson to police pimping, not to police using prostitution.
Well, I mean, All the charges. I mean, let's just be honest. Like I said before, I think they'll study this case at some point. I want to know what the government was thinking in bringing a federal case with a situation, as Gerald has said, it belongs in state court. It just does. And so adding that in, I think they're just throwing in everything under the kitchen sink to see if they get something to stick. To Gerald's point, they did get the man at the stick. That it was there, and they got the guilty verdict. And that's what, Gerald's counting as, of course, what is negating what I believe and have talked about is a victory, although not the ultimate victory. But I will say this, it's interesting to me as we look at this entire case that this is the thing, right? Like it was almost like this law was in effect to almost trap, a very successful Black man. And in this very moment in 2025, how many years later, almost 80, 100, over 100 years later, it did. It tripped him up. It's the only charge that's stuck in here.
Lauren, do you think that the prosecutor's office sees this as a victory? And if they thought we're going to spend this year and a half researching this, investigating this, preparing and trying this, and we're going to get 2 prostitution transportation convictions.
Oh no, they're devastated. I mean, look, thank God for Gerald, because he'll help them sleep at night because he's reminding them that they did get this conviction. But them prosecutors can't sleep. They are sick. They are embarrassed. They know they got out-lawyered. They know they got their behinds handed to them. This is an embarrassment, but a conviction nonetheless. And I do give that, I just as they conceded to the violence, I will concede to Gerald in the sense that, yes, they got the conviction and he's still locked up. And they got to hang their hat on that. And they got to fight tooth and nail to try to get a sentence that they feel at least reflects, some of their efforts here. Because unfortunately, like I said, this movie did not match the trailer.
Gerald, I mean, I'm sure that the prosecutors are like, we wasted our time here. This was not a good outcome, a good expenditure of our time and money to do this.
No, it was a waste of judicial resources to bring this in federal court. Let's be clear. And they should have allowed the case to proceed in state court. It should never have been brought in federal court. But we also have to recognize the significance of this type of case. There have been several key defendants that have been convicted of Mann Act violations: R. Kelly, British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell from the Epstein case, and musician Chuck Berry, just to name a few. And of course, they went after the heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson. So this has a sordid past, and I don't think the prosecutors are sleeping well. But we have to remember, this is not the original prosecuting office that brought this case. It was brought under a different administration in the Southern District of New York. And then, of course, after the election, there was a change in administration and change of U.S. attorney. So I don't think they were prepared for this case, the level of this case, and they did get out-lawyered. Yep. I mean, you have some of the best lawyers in the country that were on this case. My point, though, in pushing back on this being a complete victory is that for it to be the trial of the century, to be an O.J. Simpson type case, to be a John Gotti type case, you got to walk out of the courtroom and do the press conference with your lawyers.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like the cultural size of the trial, the amount of people talking about it, when Lauren talks about, we're going to study this for the ebbs and flows of this thing. I mean, just if it's a movie, I'm watching it and it's Cassie and it's a horror film. And then Jane comes and I'm like, oh my God, it's even worse. And then she keeps talking and I'm like, wait a minute. Now it seems like a comedy. She's still in love with him. He's still paying for her. What are we doing here? And it's this emotional roller coaster. And I think so many of us were captivated so much throughout this that I'm like, yeah, I feel like trial of the century, because you remember the way OJ brought us together. Like we were constantly talking about the trial and what's going to happen. And this became like that.
I will say this, having, watched the OJ trial and been there, I mean, that was just a moment in history. This trial in no way compares. I think it's an insult to even even speak of it alongside of it. Like, now I think what we thought we were going to get, like I said in the previous episode, right? What we thought we were going to get might have been a trial of the century, but what we ended up really getting in terms of the witnesses that were called, the testimony that came forth, I mean, most of those witnesses, as we talked about, did not want to be there. It was obvious. They stated as much. It just wasn't the trial of the century to me at all. I do not see that at all.
I mean, you know, if I want to bring back in Doc because she's having some technical issues, but of course we want her to be part of the show. I just feel like the size. I remember OJ. I remember the cultural size of it and how like culturally it like blotted out the sun and like everybody was paying attention to OJ. And I get all that. And I mean, like, that's a murder trial, right? Like that is and it's on TV. Right? Like this was not on TV because it's a federal trial. Federal trials are not televised. So that definitely changes the level. I mean, if this had been on TV, oh my God, like Americans would not have been sleeping at all. I wonder, Gerald, if you can help us understand, like the jury wasn't sequestered. And I feel like juries generally follow the judge's instructions and they surely know more than what anybody outside the courthouse is chirping about. But it does affect juries. And you wonder, A, why they're not sequestered, and B, what impact you think not being sequestered has on a jury like this.
Yeah, I think especially in this new digital age, it's very difficult for jurors not to engage with the outside conversation that's happening. You're asking them not to look on their phone, not to look on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or all the other platforms that this was streaming on, even though it was not live. And so I think that played a part in it. But I also think that, you know, the jurors said the freak off videos weren't that interesting. And so much as Judge Lake just said, this was a buildup of so much of epic proportions, and then it later died.
But Lauren, I want to deal with that issue because our friend Laura Coates over at CNN had one of the alternate jurors who saw the freak off tape, and he said, as Gerald said, that it was tame. That was the word he used, which is not what any of us who have not seen these tapes expected to be associated with these tapes. And Laura, who is a friend and I love, said, did it look forced? And I thought the question itself was quite dangerous and misplaced because you cannot always see force. You can't see the impact that Cassie getting beaten up last week is having on this moment. You can't see the impact that the blackmail of I'll release tapes in the future that he said to her last month or last week. Like you can't see the impact of that. You can't see the impact of the times she tried to leave. Like you can't always see force and coercion, but maybe that's what you need to take away a person's liberty and get a guilty verdict.
Well, I mean, they had a witness. And again, like I said, I did not have the privilege of following this moment to moment, but I do believe they called an expert, the prosecution did, that talked about the psychological trauma behind abusive relationships. And that's why I said this case is so fascinating to me, because this jury basically said, we don't believe these women. That's what the verdict said.
Yeah.
And whether we like it or not, both stated, I felt trapped, like I had to do freak offs when I didn't want to. I tried not to do them. He made me do them. He threatened me. He intimidated me. He told me he'd give the tapes off. He told me I'd have nowhere to go. The jury did not buy that.
I know.
And that's when we get into what we were talking about in the episode, our previous episode, where I always said, gosh, I don't know what's going on in this courtroom. I wonder how they're sitting. I wonder how they're leaning. I wonder how they're crying. I wonder what they look like. I wonder what the jury looks like as they're staring at them testify. I wonder what they look like under cross-examination, because there are so many intangibles, so many things that go beyond just the words on the page in a transcript, which then allow a jury to come to a conclusion that I listened to everything they said. I saw a woman get beat in a hallway and stomped and dragged. And the intention behind that beating was get y'all back in this room when the room was where a freak off was happening. Like, you know, and stop me if I'm, you know, adding things, but this is what we were seeing. And that jury still said, that did not rise to the level of coercion. And so,
the beating moment was important partly because Agnifilo said, no, he wanted the tape to protect his reputation, not because some nefarious thing. That's just part of the great lawyering that was going on here. But
it was. But I'm just saying, we're looking at all of these things, and yet the prosecution did not meet the burden. And I would really, look, and the last point I'll make, because it's based upon what you asked me in terms of the jury saying the freak off tapes were tame. Lord, honey, getting old now. You have a point, then it leaves your mind, and then it comes back when it wants to. Honey, getting old ain't no joke. But my point I was making was, when we got to the tapes, it was fascinating that the juror used that word, tame. Yeah. Right? That you could hear testimony about a woman being urinated in their mouth and by two different men. You could see her getting dragged. And yet I view the tape, and through the lens of my eyes, it's tame. Are we desensitized? But to the point, are we desensitized now, right? We're a hyper-sex society. Are we desensitized to what, a sex and violent sex or whatever looks like? Or was that particular tape just not indicative of maybe what those situations look like? I don't know, but I'm telling you, I have thought about these things over and over again. And when he used the word tame, I said to myself, well, God, if he said tame, that just says it all right there.
But you have to think of one thing, though. When you go through a case like this, you have deselected jurors for that real reason, that the ones that would be, turned off by this level of graphic sexual conduct, this level of graphic violent conduct, have already been removed. So you already have a fertile ground to lay that point. And clearly it landed with this juror saying this particular video was tame because I've seen worse. And so you probably picked that juror because they were susceptible to that message.
1,000% correct. Great point, Gerald. Totally. You're right. But still, after hearing the testimony is what I'm saying, right? After the women testify, the choice of words, and maybe this is just because I love words, but the word tame to me felt like such a statement, right? Yeah. It wasn't as bad as I thought, or it did not contain some of the things that were testified to. The word tame was just very much a real statement to me. And maybe I'm holding too much onto that word, but I found it to be interesting.
Perhaps in a way, the prosecution, to what you were saying about over-kicking the coverage, that they set this expectation that the freak off tapes would be this horrific thing, if only you could see them. And when they saw them, when the jurors and the alternates saw them, they were like, oh, well, that doesn't look like Caligula. I could see worse than that on the internet right now. It doesn't look forced to me. But whether or not Diddy is guilty or innocent in court, the scandal is a full body assault happening. Diddy might walk free one day, probably will get out at some point, but what is the toll on his health through all of this? There were several reports of Diddy's physical appearance throughout the trial. I saw him. He looked, I guess you could say, gaunt, definitely thinner. The hair is all gray. He lost a lot of weight. He seemed a little yellow. I'm sure that the food in MDC in jail was horrible, but the stress was clearly wearing on his body. You could see that. I want to bring in Dr. Frita, board certified physician for Truth Talks. Welcome to the show, Dr. Frita. We have seen Diddy showing the stress of this incredible situation in his body. Just talk about what you're seeing from your perspective on what we saw, how he was clearly internalizing and dealing with the stress.
Hello. Yes, absolutely. Lord knows Diddy had reasons to be stressed. He goes from being larger than life to now being he was a music mogul, billionaire, all of these things. Now he's facing life in prison. Plus, all of his business was out on Front Street. So stress can definitely have physical tolls. When you have stress in your body, it increases the stress hormone, cortisol. Cortisol causes your blood vessels to tighten, and that can cause high blood pressure, among other things. And so he could have had high blood pressure, headaches. Stress can cause you to have increased acid in your stomach. It can cause you not to have an appetite, which of course could make you lose weight and appear to be gaunt. However, with the other things we've heard about with substance abuse, with freak-offs, there was a lot of speculation. Does he have STDs? Does he have HIV? Now, clearly, I'm not Diddy's doctor. I don't know, but some of these other things could also cause weight loss. So let's just take substance abuse, for example. We know that they found pink powder, pink cocaine, which can have ketamine, MDMA, Molly, all of these different drugs. These things could affect the liver. And I heard you mention that he had yellow eyes. Clearly, if you have liver disease from drugs or from alcohol, that could cause some acute hepatitis, meaning an inflammation of the liver, which could lead to yellow eyes.
There's been a lot of medical conversation around Diddy for a while, much of it negative or speculative or foreboding, perhaps. There's a lot of recreational and illegal drug use in the whole culture, not just in the freak-offs, but in the whole lifestyle for quite a while. There's a lot of speculation on how Kim Porter, who was otherwise healthy and relatively young, passed away from pneumonia. Our good friend Albie Shore has made the rounds, letting the world know that he believes his multi-organ failure situation a couple of years ago was caused by Diddy. Can you talk a little bit about Kim, what she died from exactly, and how these two otherwise seemingly healthy, grown adults caught fatal or nearly fatal diseases?
Now, when it comes to Kim Porter, you do not have to be a physician to have been suspicious. She was this young, vibrant, wonderful, beautiful lady who seemed to be very health conscious. And then all of a sudden she passes away from pneumonia. And I'll tell you, at least from a medical statistical point of view, healthy young women in their 40s typically do not die from pneumonia. But that is what's reported, that she died from lobar pneumonia, meaning an infection in one of the sections of her lungs. Now, there is a report that for about 4 days prior to her passing away, that she had different flu-like symptoms. But what really gets me is the coroner, or the multiple coroners, or the medical examiners, because here's what happened. Initially, she had the autopsy done by the famous coroner, Ed Winter, right? He's the same person who did the autopsy for Michael Jackson, for Brittany Murphy, for Whitney Houston. Now, when he did his autopsy, he didn't declare that she died from pneumonia. He deferred the result, which is typically what you do when you need to do further tests, when the conclusion has not hit you, and perhaps you test for toxicologies, for poisonings. Well, for whatever reason, he ended up being off of the case. And so a different coroner came after him. That coroner did not defer anything, but declared that she died from lobar pneumonia. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible. But especially when we hear the history and the violence of Diddy, all of the substances he had access to, it just looks very suspicious. It's possible, but from a medical perspective, it just is not the norm to see a young, healthy person pass away from pneumonia. Now, take that and pair it with Albie Shore, another healthy, relatively young person who actually had multi-organ failure, meaning that not just one system went wrong, but multiple systems, like your lung system. You can get respiratory failure, kidney failure, liver failure. He actually had to have a liver transplant. And so now it goes from just being public speculation. Albie Shore is actually saying it, and supposed to have a book coming out where he outright has stated that Diddy was behind his having multi-organ failure. Albie Shore, out of his mouth on interviews, has stated that he thinks that Diddy is behind Kim Porter's death. Now, of course, we don't know, but it does look suspicious.
I also want to just get you to talk about, because stipulated is a horrible person, but prison also is a horrible thing. And prison has a specific psychological and physiological impact on people. And this person spent already a year in prison, reportedly the relatively nicer part of the prison, but still being in prison has a, can you talk a little bit about just the psychological impact that being incarcerated for a year so far would have on a person like that who went from, living in Miami mansions and LA mansions to being caged like an animal.
Absolutely. Being in prison could cause him a mental exhaustion. Okay. It can definitely cause mental issues. Let's just start with hair dye. Clearly, he does not have access to his black hair dye. And this could definitely cause him stress because for someone like Diddy, where his image is everything, we're used to him Harlem shaking and dancing and being youthful, a fashion icon. Now, all of a sudden, we see him with gray hair and with these tired looking Bill Cosby sweaters. For anyone else, maybe that wouldn't be a big deal, but that can cause him emotional stress. Also, trying to manage his image. I mean, he has called himself Brother Love, and he sits up there holding those heart signs. He calls himself a man of God. I'm Brother Love. But he knows that with our own eyes, we saw him kicking Cassie to sleep. We saw him throwing a vase at her, And so having to sit there with these polarizing images, trying to manage them in front of the judge and be in front of your young children, surely that can cause mental stress, which can lead to anxiety, depression, paranoia, insomnia. And if you don't get enough sleep, if you get sleep deprivation, that can lead to both mental and physical issues. So surely this man is under stress, both mentally and physically.
Let me push you even further. So we know what happened in the freak-offs. Multiple day, sleepless, drug-fueled Cassie, Jane, any number of other people, because Cassie wasn't the first one, sleeping with 3 to 4 men over a 2-3 day period. What do you think is the impact on the body and perhaps the mind after experiencing that over and over and over?
A lot. So let's talk about these freak-offs. We reportedly, it's been said that the freak-offs had multiple different sex partners, and reportedly they didn't always use condoms, right? They weren't always protected. So that would put you at high risk for STDs or sexually transmitted diseases, STIs, sexually transmitted infections. And this takes us back to some of the rumors. You talked about how he lost weight and how he looked gaunt. And so some people have been saying, oh, maybe he had HIV. We don't know. Definitely we don't know. But let's just talk about it from a medical perspective. If indeed he's having these freak-offs, multiple partners, and on top of that, he's been accused of sexually assaulting not only women, but he has been accused of sexually assaulting men. We don't know if that's true. But if it is, according to the CDC, 1 out of every 2 men having sex with men will develop HIV. And so we're talking about homosexual men, bisexual men, and they include transgender women in this number.
Sure.
If indeed, P. Diddy if his sexual activities include all these things, unprotected, multiple partners, men and women, then statistically speaking, he indeed would be at a higher risk for HIV and other STDs.
I meant Cassie.
Oh, Cassie. Well, whatever Cassie has, Diddy could have, since of course they had sex. But yes, we heard that Cassie was, she said that she had UTIs or urinary tract infections. So we're talking about bladder infections. She also said that she had mouth sores. But I want to talk about that a little, Teray, because when you talk about a bladder infection, and that's something that's kind of more common, especially among women. A lot of people can relate to that. But the symptoms of a UTI or a bladder infection, those symptoms actually cross over with symptoms of a lot of sexually transmitted infections. So if you have a bladder infection, you might have burning when you use the restroom. You might have burning when you have sex. You might have some discharge. You might have blood in your urine. You can get some similar symptoms from sexually transmitted infections. So I'm not saying she has sexually transmitted infections. If she's not saying it, I'm not saying it. But things like chlamydia, gonorrhea, trichomonas, other STIs could have happened, certainly from the freak-off.
Apart from the diseases, having sex with 3 to 4 strangers every week, I got to imagine that would be very damaging to a woman's body and to your spirit.
Yes. And of course, people are sex positive. This is not judging anyone who truly chooses to do it, but just the sheer physical contact, especially if there are times when there's no condom involved, it could literally make you raw, ripped. It can cause all kinds of abrasions or scratches in the walls of the vagina, which not only could cause a burning, but also increase your risk for infection and just have a psychological issue. If indeed what was testified was true and that she was in these freak-offs without wanting to be there, without consent, then the mental and the physical tolls are huge. And another thing, she talked about mouth sores. So yes, according to Cassie, her mouth sores were because of the frequent oral sex and she was having friction. But there's a very specific sexually transmitted infection that can cause mouth sores, and that's syphilis. And syphilis is on the rise. One of the first symptoms of syphilis is a sore, a painless chancre. It's like an ulcer with a raised border. And typically you think about the chancre being on the penis or the vagina. But if your sexual contact is through your mouth, then syphilis can cause mouth sores. She didn't say she has syphilis. I'm not saying it. But when she's talking about UTIs and mouth sores, it may be further than just what it seems. It could be sexually transmitted infections. And certainly these freak-offs will put her at risk.
It definitely stood out to me, too, that they would become so exhausted in doing these events, especially Cassie and Jane. I don't know what Diddy was exhausted about. He's just sitting there.
Watching.
Right? That they would be hooked up to IVs and need, an emergency rehydration and have to take a whole day off from work or anything to recalibrate their bodies after. That sounds incredible. That's wild.
Yeah, it's incredible. But Teray, you heard them. The longest freak-offs were at least 4 days long. And so you're talking about going, and sex is a physical activity. So you're talking about them sweating, having high heart rates. On top of that, reportedly, they were doing different drugs. Was it pink cocaine, ketamine, liquid X? These different drugs can also be exhausting and lead to dehydration, which would cause them to need to have some IVs. So yeah, it was a lot, these freak-offs.
Lauren, one of the freak-off participants, one of the escorts, is now suing Cassie because he got an STD and she aborted his baby. Might be suing Diddy as well, not sure. It seems like now this woman has shared her trauma, and now is she open to lawsuits from other people now?
Well, if she's an actor, if she's a bad actor in some way, maybe. I don't know. And I'm going to be honest with you. I read the headline of that. I don't know the details of that maybe Gerald has read further into it. But one thing I did say is, and this is just me, being from Detroit and knowing what I know, Cassie got money now and everybody know it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we live in a litigious society. And sometimes, look, we're looking for a deep pocket. Her pockets just got deep. So anything somebody may want to sue her for, she may have to face that as well. I don't think, she's going to be immune from any acts that maybe she may have done in the confines of these freak-offs. These are things that I found, to be fascinating. And like I said, not without not reading all of the details, there were a lot in those things that she was coordinating. I want to meet up with you. I feel safe with you. Yeah. You are the person that I want to have sex with. She was the one who opened the door. She was the one who gave the instructions. This is what we're going to do. And then this is what we're going to do until my husband came out. She was the one also posing as his wife or posing as some other person, right? There's a lot going on in here. And there's also, like, when we look at this case, she could have easily been a co-conspirator in this. Maybe she was given immunity. I don't know. Gerald might know that part. But there's a lot in here that you have Cassie connected to the actual organizing and execution of these things. And then this whole thing about wearing a condom, and maybe I'm making this up. Like I said, I'm getting old, y'all. But I think I did hear one of the sex workers, I read a bit about him wanting to wear a condom him basically saying. She
asked, can he wear a condom?
Yes.
Diddy said no, but then he did wear a condom.
But he did wear it anyway.
Yes.
Okay. So he wore it anyway. But I thought there was also something where there was talk about wearing condoms, and it was a no, we don't do that.
He said
there
that,
was.
but then he ended up wearing it. So it gets super messy. Hold on, I want to let Dr. Frita go. Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Lauren, you had one more thought?
No, I just wanted to make it clear that I did not read that Cassie was granted immunity in this federal trial, but I want to make it clear that even if she was granted immunity, that does not in any way apply to any civil cases that may be brought against her. So as I said before, everybody knows now, you hear the word 30 million, you see Cassie's face next to it at this point. So people know she has deep pockets and they may be coming for her. Gerald, I know you can definitely probably give more detail on that.
And so you also have to remember that even though he got away with the RICO, federal RICO, there's a civil RICO, and it's a preponderance of the evidence standard, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So the things that she admitted to on the stand being a part of have opened her up to civil liability. And as the judge just said, she's wide open for all types of allegations to be made and her words to be used against her. I mean, I would love to have her in a deposition and just play her tape over and over and over again.
But get to play a tape of what? Wouldn't you have to show that she had purposely wronged someone?
No, you just have to show she was negligent, or you can show she had an intentional act, and it's a lower standard. It's not the criminal proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just 51 to 49. So she's using her own words.
But you're saying the sex workers who she was with can sue her for what?
Intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, by giving them allegedly STDs. All those things are fair game in a civil aspect to sue somebody.
For when they showed up for a job that they got paid for. But they
didn't show up to get they didn't show up to get an STD. And if she knew she had an STD and she knowingly gave them that particular disease, and I mean, especially in the state of Georgia, I'm sure in California, you could be sued for that.
But you'd have to show that she knew it.
Well, she just said she knew it. She testified to it.
Exactly. Or if you are having sex with think about it. Sometimes they'd have more than one guy in one night, they said. That was testimony. So I have sores in my mouth, but I'm going to go ahead with guy number one or guy number. I can't even believe we're talking about this. This is some nastiness right here, but this is real. Guy number one, now my mouth is raw. I have maybe a little blood inside my cheek, but I'm going on to guy number two. That alone, right, is problematic, right? Now we have bodily fluids, blood potentially being exposed. And now I'm giving oral sex to the next man that may not know that I have these sores. Look, we might have to get
what jury, Lauren, is going to listen to a male sex worker saying Cassie Ventura wronged me?
You don't have to get to a jury. You just get to a deposition and play that tape over and over again. And there are juries in this state and other states that will find preponderance of the evidence. It's 51 to 49. So regardless of the person's occupation, if you show some type of negligence or an intentional act, you can recover. And it's clear from her statement.
But for them to listen to a deposition and back down, they would have to believe, right or wrong, that a jury might back him up. And you know what?
A jury just backed him up to the tune of 20 years in prison.
Not against Cassie. And you have whatever lawyer you can afford. Cassie has a millionaire's lawyer. Good luck with that.
There are a lot of good lawyers out there that aren't millionaire lawyers. You got a lot of young lawyers coming out of law school who want to make a name for themselves. So it's never about that high-end lawyer. The high-end lawyer just waiting to get taken out.
Right.
Okay, let's bring in Dr. B, because she's been struggling with the technology issues all day, all night, but she's a trooper. She's staying in the house. She's not leaving. Someday it'll work for you. Doc, since we have you, let's talk about this from a more emotional or sort of mental health perspective. What do you think Cassie, Jane, and other female victims are feeling in this moment when they saw their trauma not really be heard? They saw a world where people were like, let's defend the rich black man rather than a woman with trauma?
Well, first of all, y'all have been doing a great job. I don't think there's anything that hasn't been said. I want to go back a second because there's a big legal analyst perspective about how the prosecution did so horrible with providing evidence that this shows the systemic flaw in how they do not know how to handle abuse cases, first of all. Second of all, we're talking about Brian Steele. This is the attorney. This is the cat who also got Young Thug off of his racketeering indictment case as well with the YSL case. So this attorney, this is his lane. This is what he does. Diddy went and got the right dude. He's 2 for 2 with the racketeering cases. Then I want to go into how a lot of folks are saying that the jury had 8 men and 4 women, and how it having 8 men could have definitely been leverage for Diddy. And that those men could have very much thought, hey, wait a minute, this is a man who is being criminalized for being a freak, being sexual, and doing things that people do at a swinger party, that some married couples do it in the comfort of their own home. And I'm seeing, prostitution, but also if Diddy's going to be criminalized for prostitution, are the prostitutes also going to be criminalized? See, there's a lot of moving parts to this because you got one guy who is taking responsibility from a judicial standpoint on, actions that are now considered crimes. And then you have folks who also were involved in some of these crimes that are not being criminalized. So it's starting to look a little one-sided, like Diddy is getting a lot of criminalized crimes, but you got folks who are being prostitutes. So is prostitution not a crime, or am I tripping? Okay. Next thing is, you talk about trauma. You have a kid sitting in a courtroom, and I don't believe that they don't know these things. This is their father. I think they know their father's a mogul. I think they know that he is very much a manipulative a guy who's a control freak, who has a lot of women and is a womanizer and does what he does. But I believe to see it for some of his kids for the first time was not only trauma, but secondary trauma for them. I think that in that position, there needs to be an ongoing, some type of therapy, some type of treatment for these kids to be able to process. How is that going to impact them? How does that affect them? How do they go on as adults to nurture and have their own relationships and not be directly affected by what they not only were exposed to through hearing, but also through visually seeing. And then lastly, I want to talk about Cassie. And I did look it up. She is not immune from being sued civilly. And so while I was on my blackout through my internet, she's not immune from it. But not only is one of the sex workers suing her for an STD that she allegedly knew that she gave him, she also terminated a pregnancy, supposedly or allegedly, that was him and her's child. And so, again, to Judge Lauren's point, when you see somebody like they did with Diddy with a big dollar bill above their head, then you do open yourself up to being sued civilly. That comes with the life of having money, and you've got to be able to protect yourself from, these cases through different ways of doing it.
Gerald, she made an interesting point about the ongoing trauma that his children are going to deal with. And I wonder what you think about his sons and how this rests on them, this experience and what they've learned, how this rests on them, and how it may or may not shape the men that they become as they go forward.
I think we have to recognize that anytime you go through this type of situation, a trial of this magnitude, being it's not the trial of the century, but a huge one, that type of pressure on a young African-American male who sees his father fighting for his life and then sees the trauma that's also been caused to Black women by his father, there has to be some conflict in that young man's mind, because of course you want to support your dad and you want to make sure that he gets a fair trial and ultimately gets exonerated, but you also have to sit through all of those allegations against a person who has trained you to be the man you are. So there has to be a lot of trauma going through those minds, because again, you're seeing this, you're hearing the allegations, you're seeing the tapes, you're seeing your father go through all these things and age right before your eyes. So that's very traumatic. I know just from dealing with 20 years of trials, these things last forever. and they never quite go away. And so I think that's something they're gonna have to deal with.
Lauren, let's talk about this a little bit deeper. You know, it seems like it was a good legal strategy to have the children there, his mother there, showing that there's all these people who love and stand by this person. But it seems that it was surely brutal on the girls, at least, Chance and the twins. They are teenagers. They were seen walking out in tears at times. Some of this was definitely graphic testimony that you wouldn't want your teenager to hear about their father, and yet here it is. So is Diddy's ability to be a father and contribute to society more important than him spending his life behind bars? Like, do you really want to have the kids there to help protect dad so he can continue to be their father on the outside, even though it may lead to them being scarred in different ways?
I think that's one of the things that are left unsaid when you have the family and the children sitting there, right? You don't even have to ask that question because you have the jury basically staring at it every day. And you see the kids and the mom, and you see, as I think it was Dara that talked about in a previous episode, how it's almost a duplicitous existence, right? Where on the one hand, he's this loving father and everybody's seen the videos and he's always going viral, dancing with his kids and loving his kids and being there for his kids. I personally live in, here in Los Angeles. He is at those children's games, cheering them on as they do their cheerleading, not missing things. That's their father. And so as a juror, you're sitting there and you're looking, okay, this guy is doing all of these things. They've got him here on charges that could put him behind bars for the rest of his life. And yet then here are all of these children that he takes care of, right? It almost, I think, plays, if not consciously, unconsciously in your thought process about this burden that the prosecution had. Like, have they really proved beyond a reasonable doubt that this man was guilty of a racketeering charge, of a sex trafficking charge? Because what I know is if he's found guilty of it, I am potentially taking this man away from all of those kids. Those girls had their graduation, their prom, all of those things while this was going on. Now, one last thing I want to say too is the other side of that is, as we talk about the girls and their relationship with their fathers, because I know a little bit about this, it's been my business for the past 15 years, this dynamic of father and child. They also looked at this, and I do believe they will have to have so much counseling and so much psychological help, because they're old enough to connect and see, was what was done to these women done to our mother? What was the dynamic of who I see if I didn't know all of this about my father, or maybe if I knew it but hadn't seen it? Now that it's visually in my mind, how do I connect that with what happened to my mother? They may never talk about this with their father. He is their only living parent. But that is a lot to deal with emotionally and psychologically for these children.
Well, this trial has been filled with salacious and explicit sexual activity. Some are going to sympathize with these kids. Others, of course, will troll them, will shame them. How do you think the verdict's going to affect these children? Not necessarily in the immediate, but in the years to come when they've processed all the gruesome details. And how do they end up avoiding the girls at least, how do they end up avoiding marrying someone like him?
Yeah, I think that what we're missing too is one of the biggest issues that this is going to cause is daddy issues. And I talk about that often, right? A girl is what her daddy makes her when it comes to relationships, and a man is what his mama makes him when it comes to relationships. But also when it comes to self-identity, a man looks to his father to see how to identify with self and what kind of man he is when it comes to self-discovery. And when you're coming from the little girl having daddy issues, she's looking at this like, can I trust men? The man being my father, who I loved, who I admired, who I felt safe with, who I thought I had a safe space with, who provided for me. Now I'm seeing treat women in a way that is completely demoralizing, completely dehumanizing. And I'm seeing him be extremely cold and not having any feeling for this, right? And so how does she go on to say that, hey, men are trustworthy? And how does she go on to find her value? Because what she's seeing her father find value in women, which is sex and control and manipulation, isn't what a father wants their daughter to find value in themselves in. And so what we're hoping is that she doesn't go out there and mirror that and say, hey, unless I find a man who demoralizes me or who finds value in me sexually or value in his ability to control and manipulate me, then I don't see value in myself, because that is what I saw and I witnessed as a young girl. When it comes to his sons, right, this internal struggle of thinking, okay, is that the way a man goes about being a man? Is it all about power and money? What if my woman doesn't submit to me? What if my woman says no? Does that make me less of a man? Or are they able to differentiate the two and say, wait a minute, I'm able to learn from my father, what does not make a man a good man? What is not healthy in relationships? And I'm able to learn what was the demise of my father in many ways. And I would try my best to manage those characteristics in me if they happen to inflame, and I won't exhibit those behaviors. And I also won't glamorize those behaviors, because what's happening is, and I'll wrap on this, a lot of what Diddy has done, although he's been charged for 2 of his charges, not 3, him beating this case has been glamorized. This has not been looked down upon. It has been glamorized by the male community, looked down upon by the Black women community. And so as men looking at it as this is a win and wearing free puff t-shirts and having a free puff campaign, do his boys look at it as a duality of a win because that's my father, but is it really a win because these women were still victimized? And so I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, I would hope that they get into some counseling and therapy as a lifestyle so they can really differentiate between the two of saying, well, yes, if I got my father back, I did win. But these were still women who were victimized and were still abused. And how do I make sure that I don't end up exhibiting those behaviors and those actions, because I too don't want to end up being in that same position. And more than that, I don't want to be that type of cold-hearted, sociopathical guy who can do and demoralize women and people and glamorize it and think it's okay for the win and for the money and for the power.
Ultimately, Diddy's long-term reputation depends on a few factors: how he emerges as a public figure, how the culture chooses to remember him after all this, not just for the trial, but for his impact overall. Before he was charged, VH1 and everyone was celebrating him, colleges giving him honorary degrees. New York City gave him the key to the city. It came from Eric Adams, so take that with a grain of salt. But, is Diddy and the bad boy legacy bigger than the moment? Lauren, you first. What do you think about the legacy of Diddy at this point?
I knew you were coming to me. I was like, he's going to come to me first, because this is something, I'm good for saying, I've been thinking about that, because I have. Mm-hmm. I've been thinking about it from a legal perspective, because just because this trial is over, as we see, doesn't mean that there won't be other civil claims. And if he doesn't change his ways, potentially other criminal claims, right? If things don't change with his behavior. I do think this is a part of his legacy forever. I do not think he can produce or dance his way out of this. I think the visuals that we have seen, and look, I'm speaking because I am a woman as well, right? I looked at that video, that beating of that young woman. It's something that will probably always play in my mind every time someone says his name. And I don't think it's something he's going to be able, and let me be clear, I'm not saying he ain't gonna be able to make no more money, because it's a whole bunch of people out here that's gonna make money with people who make money and just gonna call it a day. But I don't think he eclipses this. I don't think it's something that he can erase, put, sweep under the rug, or come back out moving as if I beat these RICO charges and now I'm back to dancing on the BET Awards. I don't think we're there.
I want to show you guys something before we get into Dr. B, because we're wondering if we're going to cancel, if everybody's going to cancel him. I think it is complicated at this point. I want to complicate the question even more. Roll the video.
If so, bump somebody. All right, thanks. I love you, man. Bye. I got my MTV out. Savage! I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get! Yes! What's next? What's next? I gotta get it. I'm not gonna stay fucking down. I'm not gonna stay fucking lying down. I'm not. I can't do it, man. I can't do that. What's next? Give me something else. What can't you do? I can do it. I can do anything.
Gerald, I know that guy. He is relentless. He is larger than life. He is liable to fly off the handle with a high level of anger and then somehow come back down. He believes he can do anything. You can't say no to him. The prosecution said that multiple times in their close. You cannot say no to this man. And you see right there, he's like, you can't say no to me. I can impose my will on any situation. Do you think that this individual is getting canceled out of this situation, or is he still going to have a legacy and more of a career?
You know, a few years ago, I would agree that he could be canceled. But then we saw a man who had a similar tape rise to become the 47th president of the United States. So I'm not sure. I think that what we saw in the video is both videos is emblematic of who the man really is. And so my hope is that the community and the culture will recognize that we should not celebrate the brutalization of Black women. We should not celebrate this as a victory, because it's not. And so my hope is that we as African-American men hold him to a higher standard than the court system will, because we all saw the tape. It should have been tried in state court, because in state court, he'd be spending a substantial amount of time in prison. But I'm not sure. And I've seen him for 30 years try to spin things, and now he's trying to spin it like he's a Teflon Don. And so I'm not sure, and I'm concerned.
I mean, he's not spinning it like he's a Teflon Don. It seems like he's a Teflon Don. That was my first thought, that Puff always gets away. And yet and still, the notion of control, the notion of rehabilitation seems complicated, perhaps a bridge too far with a person like this. There's some secret calls happening from jail that are, I don't know, concerning to some people. Let's play that real quick.
Do not entertain none of this nonsense and nothing over the phone. I'm gonna need you to get rid of all the leftover pizza boxes. The what? All the boxes.
He's talking to Cole. He's dumb.
All the boxes. Okay. Make sure you recycle the plastic like we talked about. Yeah. Did Jay reach out yet? Nah, Bob. He ghosting.
Yeah, watch.
What this motherfucker doing? These things sweet.
You heard him?
Because I'm in here.
Jay-Z reach out.
You about to get out on bail. No. Hey, yo, check this out. Need you to reach out to the producer. Let these motherfuckers know there's a release date for that new Netflix movie. Alright, Pop. It's fucking crazy right now.
You know what's crazy, Gerald? This man was huge in 90s hip hop when we made like 100 songs telling each other, don't talk on the phone. The feds is listening. Don't say nothing. I'm sure B.I.G. made at least 3 songs talking about don't talk on the phone. And Puff says, don't talk on the phone. And here he is talking on the phone in obvious code. We can only guess what pizza boxes and plastic are, but they're not pizza boxes and plastic. This does not sound like a man who's thinking about rehab. Gerald, I think out of this situation, he would say, I have nothing to change. They were wrong. I was right. Why should I change at all?
Well, what he's saying is for you to get rid of more of the evidence to more of his criminality. That's clearly what he's saying in the tape. I mean, it's not hard. Maybe I've been doing criminal defense too long. It's not hard to figure out what he's talking about as far as the pizza boxes, tapes, and also other incriminating things like the plastic, which is probably the baby oil and Astroglide. So, we just got to understand that there's no ability to rehab that away. Right. And so, like I said, you got to understand that when his lawyers went out there for the press conference, they ran that by him. His media team is trying to spin this, and he's talking about it in the Netflix special that's coming out. So I just think that at this point, he needs some real counseling from his attorneys that when you pick up that phone and it tells you as you are picking up the phone, don't talk on the phone, period.
Dr. Brian, I don't think this man is going to be canceled. I think overall we see over the long term, a lot of people seem canceled at the beginning and then they're end up on the long run, they're not. I think that this person will be able to survive this. As far as a public figure, he's not going to go back to making records and being the hot guy on the, but like, I don't, do you think that he will be canceled out of this situation?
One, I don't think he's going to be canceled. Two, I don't think he really gives a fuck. The other thing is, I mean, he's Diddy. He's been Diddying for how many years? He's not new to this. This man can get out of prison today or in 5 years and still pick up wherever he wants to pick up. In that video that we just seen where he's, what's next? I'm not going to lose. What's next? What's next? Bring it. That's a person who understands their power. They've been using their power and they know exactly how to apply it and with who. People like that are not sensitive to life in general. They are circumstantially stressed out. Diddy is having an issue because he is behind bars without access, which is limiting his manipulation, his control, and his power per se. If Diddy's out, all he has to do is make phone calls and shot call again. There's people who are still in fear of him that are still going to run plays he says to run. There are people like Judge Lake said, who are going to work with Diddy, no matter who feels any way about it. And again, Diddy winning this verdict, for the most part, was a win for majority of the culture and for the Black male community. It is all over social media. People are not having a problem with him coming home. And there's a lot of women who were silently saying, give him time served. Let him come home. So they're not tripping off of this. You know, and I'm going to say this and let it sound like it is. The small-minded people are more worried about what Diddy's going to do when he gets out. The people who have a mindset that understand that once I did it, I could do it again. And when you have the kind of coldness and verticalness, and I don't really give a fuck like Diddy has, he doesn't care whether you deal with him or not. In his perspective, he doesn't need people lined up at the door offering him opportunities. This is a guy who will build his door, build his own lock, open it up, and set up shop on his own. Okay, so he's not tripping off of all that, nor does he care about being canceled.
I mean, there's the possibility to do that, but so many people would surely feel or be not comfortable working with this person. Even though you got off on all the big charges, we saw you have been an horrific human being for many years. The many times that you've beaten women. Like, how do we just like jump back into the fray of liking this person and working with this person when that is what's going on?
The only thing that will stop him is him getting 20 years to life. Mark my word, and I can't wait to say I told you so. If that or when, let me say when that man gets released, Diddy days and Diddy times and Diddy dancing and Diddy making Diddy money is not coming to a stop. People have to be extremely naive to even think that. They have to be in a very small think tank. The only thing that can keep him is him being in prison. And that's only imprisoning him physically, because mentally, I still believe he's going to attempt a shot call behind bars.
I mean, you know, it's going to be tricky for him to maintain the power that he's had before. And even with felonies, Gerald, right, you can't be the director of a company with this level of felony on your record, right?
Well, it depends on if you own the company. And like you said, he builds his own enterprise. So I don't see the money stopping. And I mean, just look at Suge Knight calling shots from prison right now. R. Kelly's still releasing songs from prison, and Bill Cosby is trying to create content. And so, you know, the ultimate wrap of this whole thing is there's a 34-time convicted felon in the White House. And so, like I said before, you know, in a different era, I'd say there's a possibility of cancel and it's necessary. But in this area, in this arena, I think we're just witnessing the return. And that's very disturbing, considering the level of brutality and violence towards women that we've seen in this case.
And
I know the world that has seen the Cassie tape will not forget the Cassie tape, right? That image will be in our minds forever. And that hopefully is something that we remember from this situation, not just Diddy celebrating because he won, but the actual pain and trauma that that woman went through to get to this situation. Thank you so much for joining us on this amazing conversation about all aspects of this Diddy trial. This is the way Truth Talks does it. We'll be back tomorrow night.